Hello students, you are welcome to the final unit of this module. And in this final unit, we'll be looking at assessment. And in the first session of this final unit, which is unit 6, we'll be looking at assessment in physics teaching. My name is Patrick Ej. Now by the end of this session, you should be able to explain the terms test and testing as applied in physics teaching. Define the term assessment in different ways. State and explain the types of assessment employed in teaching physics. Now let's look at test and testing. And what is a test? So basically a test is a measuring tool, or it is an instrument in education. And why are we saying it is a measuring tool? Oftentimes in your classroom, after teaching your concept or after teaching a topic, you give your learners an exercise for them to do. You give them a class test. You give them a mid-semester or a mid-term exam, an end-of-term exam. And what is the purpose of this? All these are to measure their level of understanding. And so test becomes a measuring tool. And a test is considered to be a kind of class measurement device that is typically used to find out something about a person. So we can use it to find out their level of understanding as mentioned earlier. And it is an educationally common type of tool which an individual will complete himself or herself, and the purpose is to determine changes or gains that resulted from instruction. So testing, on the other hand, is the process of administering the test on the pupils. So in other words, the process of making you or letting you take the test in order to obtain a quantitative representation of the cognitive or non-cognitive traits you possess is called testing. So test is the tool and testing is the process. So let's take note of that. Now let's look at various definitions of assessment. And in assessment, it can be thought of as occurring when one person in some kind of interaction, being it direct or indirect with another person, is conscious of obtaining and interpreting information about the knowledge, about the understanding, abilities, and attitudes of the other person. And so assessment is a systematic basis for making inference about the learning and development of students. So the basis through which we can make an inference about a student learning is through assessment. That's the process of defining, selecting, designing, collecting, analyzing, interpreting, and using information to increase students' learning and development. It also talks about assessment. Now, classroom assessment is broadly defined as any activity or experience that provides information about student learning. So that activity that will help you, the teacher in the classroom, to gain more information about how learning in the student is occurring. It's your classroom assessment. And from the definitions, we can say that assessment is a human activity and it involves interaction, and the aim of this interaction is to understand what the learners have achieved. Assessment can be formal or informal. Assessment may be descriptive rather than judgment in nature, and its role is to increase students' learning and development. It also helps learners to diagnose their problems and to improve the quality of their subsequent learning. Now, looking at all these nature of assessment, then we will see that assessment basically talks about collecting data and using the collected data to make or arrive at a decision about the learning of your learners or of your students. So teachers learn about students' progress not only through formal tests, not only through examinations, projects, but also through moment-by-moment observation of our learners. So in the classroom, we can monitor the behavior of our learners, how they cooperate, how they cope when a lesson is ongoing, to give us an idea as to whether they really understood the things that were taught or not. And so as a teacher, to assess science students' knowledge, their skills, strategies, and attitudes, we must we require a variety of tools and approaches to do this. So teachers, you must ask questions, you must observe your students engage in a variety of learning activities and processes, and also examine students' work in progress. You do all these things to gain information about students. So the information that you gain from the assessment activities that were mentioned informs and shapes what happens in the classroom. Types of assessment applied in the teaching and learning of physics. An assessment can be formative, it can be summative or diagnostic in the classroom. Now let's look at formative assessment. And this is given during the instructional unit and provides students and teachers with information about students' progress in accomplishing prescribed learning outcomes. And formative assessment also evaluates the effectiveness of instructional program content, method, sequence, and pace. So a typical example of formative assessment is the class exercises we give to our learners, the various kind of questions we even ask them in the course of the instructional process. They are all forms of formative assessment. Now, summative. And summative assessment is based on an interpretation of the assessment information collected and is given at the end of an instructional unit. And it helps determine the extent of each student's achievement of prescribed learning outcomes. So evaluation should be based on a variety of assessment information. So a typical example of the summative assessment is the end of term or end of semester exams that our learners do take. And summative assessment is used primarily to measure students' achievement, to report to parents or guardians, to report to students themselves and other stakeholders, or to measure the effectiveness of an instructional program. Now let's look at diagnostic assessment. And this form of assessment is given before instruction and it determines students' understanding of topics before learning takes place. And it is used to collect data on what students already know about the topic. And the goal of this form of assessment is to get a snapshot of where students currently stand. So before you go to the class, you already know the level of your learners before you begin the new topic with your learners. It enables teachers to also make sound instructional choices as to how to teach the new content and what teaching approach to use in the classroom. Now, students, in this session, we looked at assessment as well as the types of assessment. And the types of assessment were the formative, the diagnostic, and the summative assessment. Now, in your own words, define assessment. Then to state and explain the three types of assessment, you are to present answers to this question in the next session.